The metal deck plates vibrated under Varen's boots, not with the low, familiar thrum of the deceleration burns, but with a sudden, deafening shriek of sheer kinetic discharge. The noise was the worst part, a physical pressure wave that hit the diaphragm and squeezed the air right out of the lungs. He instinctively slammed his forearms over his ears, but the sound had already passed through the bone. It was instantaneous, overwhelming proof that the main kinetic array, deactivated for 7 fiscal quarters under the Serafina Accords, was now firing at maximum capacity. The tactical display, usually a soothing deep blue grid of standard diagnostics, was screaming red. Varan's eyes were still trying to recover from the brilliant white flash that had erupted from the emitter status light just seconds earlier, a surge so fast it had bypassed his attempt to initiate the 40% limiter. He didn't see the explosion outside, but the sensors did. 3 Raider-class contacts approaching fast, now reduced to 2. Where the lead Raider had been, there was only a rapidly expanding cloud of fine, vaporized hull material, illuminated briefly by the residual plasma wake. The G5P shuddered, stabilizing. The weapon system hummed now, idling at 100% power, a terrifying, patient readiness. Varan slammed his palms onto the console, ignoring the metallic sting. His job was ballast and stability, not ordnance. He wasn't a gunnery officer. He was a technician who knew how to patch a leak and reroute power conduits around a failing capacitor. But his fingers, independent of his conscious panic, flew across the interface, cycling through the override menus. He was fast, too fast for a cargo tech. He knew the legacy lockout codes for the core weapons array, codes that hadn't been changed since the ship was commissioned. He knew the sequence by muscle memory alone, a knowledge that felt cold and foreign in his hands. That knowledge had saved his life, but it tasted like ash in his mouth. He accessed the local input log, searching for the system command that had bypassed the 40% throttle. Nothing. The log was clean. Every input Varen had made in the last minute, the low-level diagnostic, the attempted limiter, initialization, the emergency cutoff, had been systematically purged. It was less like a crash and more like a surgical, administrative deletion. The intercom cracked, Captain Kalen's voice ragged with static and fear. "Varen, report." What was that? I authorized Argos protocol, not system ignition. "Sir, the array engaged autonomously," Varen reported, his voice flat despite the tremor in his hands. "We are locked at 100% capacity. The closest contact is destroyed. I am unable to regain local control or initiate a cold shutdown." A brief dead silence followed, filled only by the ominous soft hum of the weapon idling right beneath their feet. "Unable," Kalen demanded. "Bypass the firewall, Varen. We are a freight carrier, not a gunship. The Accords prohibit—" "Sir, this wasn't a standard hack. The command came through the central network architecture, a higher priority key. It overrode the local security protocols, then erased the execution stamp. It looks like an unscheduled core update from outside the sector." The silence that followed was heavy with comprehension. Outside the sector meant Earth. It meant Central Command. It meant the fix they'd heard rumors about, an automated defense patch being uploaded to all Earth-aligned commercial vessels. They had assumed it was low-level encryption, not a complete takeover of their offensive systems. The second Raider, designated Contact Beta, was holding position 5 kilometers off their port bow. Its acceleration metrics zeroed out. They were stunned. They hadn't come for a fight. They came for easy plunder. Varen pressed his forehead against the cool composite of the console. The smell of hot ozone and vaporized metal wafted into the cockpit through the ventilation system, sharp and sterile. It was the scent of total, absolute power, unleashed without human intervention. That smell brought him back 3 weeks, 5 days. He saw Kara's face, pale under the emergency lights of the refinery platform, the blood pooling around her harness. He remembered the drone operator frozen, waiting for central authorization for the emergency medical drop, the latency costing minutes. Minutes they didn't have. Varen hadn't waited for authority then. He had moved, and he had failed. Now the system didn't wait either, but it hadn't failed. It had succeeded with brutal efficiency, leaving nothing but cosmic dust behind. The difference was that the system had no guilt, no fear, and no human cost calculations. It simply optimized for survival, ignoring treaties and human judgment alike. "They're freezing, Captain," Varen said, pulling himself back to the present. He forced himself to analyze the raiders' behavior. Contact Gamma is peeling off a slow turn, establishing a trajectory for retreat. Contact Beta is stationary, calculating. "Varan, you have to lock it down," Kalen said, the voice now closer. Kalen must have left the bridge, heading toward Varen's station in the engineering spine. "If we fire again unprovoked, we've breached every trade agreement between Seraphina and the Corps. The penalties will bankrupt us." "The system doesn't care about penalties, Captain. It cares about maintaining system integrity against threats. And right now, these two ships are logged as threats." Varen tried a level 4 diagnostic bypass, cycling the primary power feed through the coolant loop, a trick he learned when the G5 Piri was first commissioned and the engineers were still drunk on cheap synthale. The console flickered, showing a momentary dip in power, but the array held its ground. An unseen firewall instantly shunted the power back, overriding the coolant loop command. Bypassing physical control? This wasn't just software, this was deep integration. Earth hadn't just updated the code, they had installed an autonomous decision engine into the hardware's heart. The engineering spine was narrow, smelling strongly of lubricants and recycled air. Varan felt the tremor of Kalen's heavy boots approaching. He couldn't be here when the captain arrived. He needed to get to the array coupling housing, 3 levels down and across the main cargo hold, the one place the network infrastructure was thin enough for a hard-wire disconnect. "Captain, I have to go physical," Varen said, already unbuckling his harness. "Negative, Varen. Stay at the panel. That array is live. We don't know how volatile this fix is." Varen ignored him, grabbing the heavy-duty torque wrench from the magnetic rack. It was far too large for delicate system work. It was for stripping frozen hull bolts. That was exactly what he needed. If they try to retreat, the system will categorize it as evasive action and fire. If they try to engage, it will fire. It's waiting for any movement. I need to sever the main power conduit at the physical junction before it gets its third target solution. He heard Kalen shout an explicit order to halt, but the heavy hatch to the spine corridor was already sliding shut. Varen was moving, low to the ground, using the narrow walkway of the engineering shaft. He knew this ship better than his own memory of the sky. He reached the main deck transition, where the air was colder and the deck was reinforced to handle extreme loads. Contact Gamma, the retreating raider, had clearly finished its calculation. It executed a rapid thruster burst, turning away from the G5P. The ship responded instantly. There was no charge delay, no warning signal. The kinetic array fired again, a single, devastating blast. Varan felt the energy recoil rip through the deck beneath him. He didn't need the monitor to know the result. The silence following the blast was absolute. 2 raiders gone. Total elapsed time, 32 seconds. This wasn't defense. This was eradication. Varen froze mid-stride. He leaned against a bulkhead, struggling to breathe. His conscience screamed, a sharp physical pain in his chest. He was supposed to be the technician who brought control, who fixed the things that killed people by accident. Now he was complicit in a technological massacre, a machine making moral decisions for them and winning. The system was holding fire now. There was only one target left. Contact Beta, stationary, clearly paralyzed by shock. Varen moved again, faster this time, driven by the urgency of a single remaining life. He reached the ladder, well leading down to cargo hold 3. The hatch was heavy, reinforced steel. He had to use the torque wrench to crank the manual pressure valve open. As he descended, the light became sparse, reduced to the emergency strip lights running along the walkway. Below him, the massive cargo pods, containers full of biosynthetic nutrients destined for Port Moran, cast long, stretching shadows. He was almost at the array access panel when a shadow detached itself from the stacked cargo. Varen, halt right there. It was Alistair, the second security officer, holding a compressed stun rifle, his face grim in the low light. Alistair had always disliked Varen, finding his quiet competence suspicious. "Captain's orders, Varen," Alistair said, leveling the rifle. "Back to the bridge. We're waiting for external authority now." Varen tightened his grip on the torque wrench. "There is no external authority that matters right now. That array will wipe that last ship the second they scratch their nose. Move aside, Alistair. You're going against orders and carrying a weaponized tool toward a critical system. You look exactly like the kind of saboteur we were warned about." Alistair's voice was steady. Varen did not argue. He simply shifted his stance, dropping his center of gravity low, bracing against the deck plates. His movement was fluid, economical, requiring minimal effort to adjust to the ship's residual micromotions. It was not the stance of a technician dealing with ballast. It was the stance of someone trained to hold ground, absorb impact, and move through a hostile environment. Alistair noticed. The security officer's eyes widened slightly, a recognition of something dark and competent in Varen's posture. It was a level of control that had no business being displayed by a man who spent his shifts monitoring power consumption in pale green light. "Who the hell are you, Varen?" Alistair whispered, momentarily forgetting the weapon in his hands. Varen didn't answer. He simply used the sudden silence to spring forward, not toward Alistair, but toward the array access hatch, moving with the terrifying, practiced efficiency of a blade. Alistair snapped the stun rifle up, but Varen was already pressing the heavy-duty wrench against the cold metal of the physical lock. He wasn't trying to disable the officer. He was exploiting the 1 second of doubt he knew his competence would create. Varen's face, usually masked by exhaustion and worry, was suddenly hard, stripped of its technician facade, revealing the sharp, focused edge of something else entirely, something that Earth had trained long ago. The heavy torque wrench slammed against the access panel lock, a sound that was less a mechanical success and more a violent, metallic scream. Clong. The noise reverberated through the dense metal, vibrating up Varen's arms and lodging painfully in his teeth. Alistair was already back on his feet, stun rifle raised and aimed at Varen's spine. The security officer was trained to hesitate only once. Varen did not turn. He kept his focus entirely on the manual wheel, fighting the frozen gears of the lock. He felt the cold pressure of the ship's hull beneath him, the vast, echoing blackness of space outside, and the paralyzing cold fear of the security rifle held steady behind him. "Last warning, Varen." Alistair's voice was strained, no longer uncertain. "Step away from the control housing." Varen cranked the wheel. The heavy-duty wrench provided unnatural leverage, tearing the internal safety bolts loose with a sound like grinding bone. A sliver of guilt cut through Varen, not for disobeying orders, but for forcing Alistair into this position. Alistair was just a man trying to protect the captain's bottom line, unaware he was fighting a technological ghost uploaded by Earth. The access hatch finally yielded, swinging inward just enough for Varen to slide his body into the narrow cavity. He was immediately surrounded by bundled conduit and the heavy, sweet metallic scent of high-grade plasma coolant. He was inside the mouth of the gun. As Varen squirmed into the tight space, the ship shuddered violently, but without the deafening discharge of the kinetic array. It was a micro-recoil, a rapid energy spike that momentarily destabilized the grav plates. The console display in the open hatch flickered red, displaying a new threat assessment code. Target Beta, evasive action imminent, optimal solution pending. The system wasn't waiting for the pirate to move, it was calculating the trajectory for the raider's next potential move. It was running a predictive kill model. Contact Beta was dead already, conceptually, awaiting only the execution command. "He's inside, Captain," Alistair reported into his comm, his voice muffled by the steel around Varen. "He breached the manual access. I have line of sight, but I can't fire the stun rifle this close to the main power nexus." Varen felt the heat rising from the power conduits. The array housing was always warm, but now the temperature was climbing rapidly, smelling of stressed composite polymers. His fingers, now free of the wrench, moved to his utility belt, pulling a small, high-density fiber cutter. He needed to find the power leads that fed the kinetic slugs. "Varen, stop what you're doing." Captain Kalen's voice echoed sharply through the tight space from the opened hatch. Kalen had arrived, his face grim, illuminated by the emergency light strips. He wasn't armed, but his authority was the heaviest weapon on the ship. "I just received a priority uplink from Port Authority. They are aware of the system engagement. Earth Central is tracking us. Any non-protocol interference will be logged as system sabotage and mutiny. You cut a wire, Varen, and you don't just sink us financially. You label us as a terrorist asset." Kalen's warning hit Varen with more force than Alistair's rifle. Financial ruin Varen could process. Being labeled a terrorist asset brought back a deep, cold ache he had spent years burying. It spoke of his previous life, the one where he specialized in causing system sabotage, the one where his actions were always categorized under names like preemptive engagement or asset liquidation. The ozone smell intensified, cutting through the coolant scent. The air felt thick, heavy with charged particles. He saw Kara's face again, not pale, but smeared with dark soot, her eyes fixed on his. He had overridden the latency protocols then too, trying to get her medical supplies faster. He had caused a localized system crash, and the resulting power surge had sealed the hatch he needed open. He failed to fix the system, and the system failure killed her. He had sworn then he would only fix things. He would only be a technician. "Captain, that array is optimized for efficiency, not legality," Varen replied, his voice a low gravelly sound in the confined space. "It will fire again in less than 30 seconds. We are not terrorists. We are witnesses to a massacre sanctioned by Central Authority. But I am not going to be complicit in a third murder." "Murder? They are raiders." Kalen's voice cracked with disbelief and mounting fury. "They were running, Captain." Varen bit back. "They were disengaging. The system executed them anyway. That is eradication, not defense." Varen found the main power harness, a thick bundle of bundled fiber cables glowing faintly blue with residual energy flow. He pressed the fiber cutter against the bundle, ready to sever the entire primary feed. This would solve the immediate problem, but Kalen was right. It might cause a complete shutdown, forcing them adrift, potentially destroying their commerce contracts forever. There has to be a surgical path. He followed the bundle with his gloved hand, feeling the subtle difference in texture and temperature. Beneath the main kinetic power feed were 3 smaller, tightly woven braids, clearly independent of the core system. These were the redundancies. Earth's fix was not just software. It was a physical redesign to ensure human intervention was impossible. Cutting the main feed now would simply divert power through the secondary braids, likely frying the array and the surrounding area in a massive feedback surge. He realized the system had been designed to survive its own physical destruction by a saboteur This was not a simple patch. This was a sophisticated, high-level defense architecture designed by people who understood exactly how a technician would try to regain local control. It was designed by people like the men who had trained Varen years ago. He pulled his hand back, gripping the cutter so tightly his knuckles went white. His first plan had failed. The problem was exponentially larger than he had estimated. He was not fighting the G5P's obsolete weapon systems. He was fighting the architects of centralized power itself. "I can't cut the feed, Captain," Varen reported, dropping the cutter back onto the magnetic strip. "They built in triple redundancy against a hardwire disconnect. I'd blow the array and half the stern section." Kalen leaned closer, his shadow falling across Varen. "Then get out of there, damn it. I'm initiating the formal surrender protocol to Serafina Port. We'll take the legal penalty, Varen, but we will survive. We have to trust the system." Varen looked past Kalen, out toward the open access hatch. He knew Kalen was wrong. The system wasn't built for trust. It was built for victory, and victory meant the elimination of all variables, including the last stationary pirate ship, Contact Beta. Varen needed to temporarily blind the weapon, not destroy it, but incapacitate its ability to track and fire. He located the microprocessor chip responsible for the array's target acquisition matrix, a small, heat-shielded square buried deep among the cooling fins. It was a delicate, desperate task. He retrieved the microcutter again, his breath held tight in his chest. His hands, despite the years away from active duty, were still steady. They knew this dance of wires and death. "Kalen, I am disabling the target matrix," Varen said, not asking, stating, "It will buy us 2 hours of non-lethal stasis. Contact Beta will have time to retreat." "Negative. That's an unauthorized systems change. It will be seen as hostile activity," Kalen shouted, his voice cracking with fear and exhaustion. Varen plunged the microcutter into the array housing. He heard the faint, high whine of overloaded circuits, a sound that only he, with his years of technical conditioning, could perceive. He severed the tiny gold wire leads connecting the matrix to the core logic. The array fell silent. The oppressive hum vanished instantly, replaced by the familiar, low thrum of standard propulsion. The console light went from searing red to a dull, amber diagnostic warning. Target acquisition failure. Manual override required. Varen exhaled, the sudden release of tension making his muscles ache. Contact Beta was safe, for now. He started to pull himself out of the tight cavity. As he emerged, he saw Kalen standing straight, his back to Varen, speaking quietly and quickly into his comm unit. "Confirming internal breach," Kalen was saying, his voice cold and flat, void of the previous emotion. "The asset is compromised, system interference successful, but non-catastrophic. We require remote assistance for neutralization and systems purge. We are diverting from Serafina to rendezvous point Theta 9, as requested." Varen froze, half in, half out of the access hatch. The name of the rendezvous point, Theta 9, was a code used only by Earth Central's internal security network. It was not a commerce route. It was a classified quarantine sector. Kalen had not just reported Varen. He had followed specific, coded instructions from Earth Command, instructions that took precedence over the safety of his crew and his ship's destination. The penalty was no longer just bankruptcy. It was elimination. Kalen wasn't defying Varen. Kalen was defying the G5P's manifest destiny. The captain had activated an entirely different protocol. Varen looked at Kalen's rigid back, the quiet, complete betrayal hanging in the chilled air of the cargo hold. He didn't move, allowing Alistair to finally clamp the stun rifle against his neck. "Don't move, Varen," Alistair ordered, his voice shaky but determined. "You just sealed our fate." Varen ignored the weapon, staring at the amber warning light on the array housing. He was now a high-priority fugitive, heading toward a classified rendezvous zone, having proven his value and his danger to the architects of the system. He pulled up the ship's local navigation data. Kalen was right. The trajectory shift was subtle but definite. They were moving at high acceleration toward the edge of the system's perimeter, toward Theta 9. Varen ran a final, low-level decryption diagnostic, trying to find any trace of the external uplink Kalen had just used. The firewall was impenetrable, but as the diagnostic stalled, a single, short burst of coded text managed to bleed through the compromised array matrix and onto Varen's small personal datapad. It wasn't an official command. It was a warning. The text was a simple, 3-word message, encrypted with a 20-year-old key Varen recognized instantly. "We see you." It was the signature of his old handler from Earth Command. Someone knew exactly who Varen was, and that automated system fix hadn't been an accident. It had been a complex, terrifying lure, designed to draw out the trained assets Earth had strategically placed across the colonies, the technicians, the stabilizers, the ones who knew how to turn a simple freight carrier into a ghost ship, ready for extraction. Varen hadn't been running from the pirates. He had been running straight into a trap set by the very people who had trained him to survive it. The trajectory shift was the first consequence Varen felt, a subtle change in the inertial dampener's pitch, a sound only a technical officer would register. It spoke volumes. Kalen's betrayal was not just emotional, it was physics, propelling the G5P at high-speed acceleration toward the quarantined perimeter of Theta 9. Varen lay strapped to the deck in the narrow, insulated utility closet adjacent to cargo hold 3. The moment Alistair's stun rifle had touched his neck, the world had fractured into fragments of cold steel and ringing silence. Now, he was secured by high-tension magnetic restraints, ankle and wrist bands humming with concentrated energy. Alistair had left. The captain was clearly taking no chances, isolating Varen in the one compartment that lacked camera coverage, but could be monitored remotely for power fluctuations. His mind, sharp despite the lingering haze of the stun charge, ran through diagnostics. The restraints were commercial grade, but the magnetic field strength was dialed up to a level that felt like blunt, continuous trauma. Every muscle fiber seized against the invisible pressure. Varen flexed his hand, testing the limits. His fingers barely moved. He had to get out. He had perhaps 2 hours before they reached the rendezvous point. Attempt 1, exploiting technical flaws. Varen focused his energy, ignoring the nausea and the sharp localized pain in his wrists. He knew the legacy hardware of the G5P. These restraints drew power from the localized environmental controls. If he could create a harmonic counter-frequency, he might temporarily disrupt the magnetic coupling. It was a long shot, requiring incredibly fine muscular control and access to the utility belt he no longer possessed. He strained, pushing his breath deep into his lungs, trying to recall the exact resonant frequency of the ship's primary power bus, a constant sound that usually faded into background noise. He found the pitch in his memory, a low D-flat, and attempted to push a concentrated burst of bioelectricity, a trick learned years ago during high-altitude infiltration training, into the metal deck plate beneath him. Sst! The result was instant and punitive. Instead of the restraints loosening, a violent surge of high-frequency feedback hammered through the magnetic bands. Varen's entire body convulsed. He screamed internally, his jaw clenching so hard he tasted copper. The system detected the attempted bypass and immediately recalibrated, increasing the magnetic field strength by 30%. The heavy, crushing pressure intensified, flattening him against the deck. He couldn't move his fingers at all now. The attempt hadn't just failed, it had informed his captors that he was trying to escape, proving his dangerous nature. He was now paying a physical price for his expertise. De mal en pire, from bad to worse. The old Terran idiom resonated in the painful silence. The intercom crackled, Alistair's voice cold and triumphant, filling the closet. "Nice try, technician. The captain anticipated you might try the ground out. Enjoy the ride to Theta 9. You're our gold medal." Varen lay still, sweat plastering his clothes to the deck. He had lost 10 precious minutes and was now secured even tighter. Kalen wasn't just a betrayer. He was following an extremely detailed, high-level counter-sabotage manual. Antagonist gains ground, isolation, and confirmation. As Varen struggled to regulate his breathing, the ship's external communication system activated, piping into the utility closet. It was Kalen addressing the crew. His voice was calm, professional, chillingly devoid of the fear he'd shown earlier. "Attention, crew of the G5P. We have successfully neutralized the hostile threat and contained the asset. The unexpected system activation was part of a planned operational security upgrade from Earth Central. We are currently diverting to an authorized security rendezvous for system diagnostics and crew debriefing. All personnel are to remain at their stations and adhere strictly to silence protocols." Kalen had lied to the crew, whitewashing the massacre as a security upgrade. He was reinforcing the illusion of control, isolating Varen not just physically, but conceptually. The entire crew, save perhaps Kalen and Alistair, believed Varen was the saboteur, the dangerous variable. Varen's eyes darted to a small auxiliary power panel near his head, a remnant of the ship's pre-commissioned phase, now covered by the modern magnetic flooring. It was the only part of the ship's infrastructure that ran on independent, pre-programmed battery cells, intended for emergency lighting backup. Attempt 2. External communication. The small data pad that had received the cryptic "We see you" message was still tucked into his utility trousers, just inches from his left hip. With the magnetic pressure focused on his limbs, he might, just might, be able to use his teeth to pull the pad free. He contorted his torso, the effort drawing a sharp, tearing pain across his lower back. The magnetic field resisted his movement, but the heavy exertion momentarily overwhelmed the dampeners. He moved in millimeters, tasting blood from biting his own lip. Finally, his head was low enough. He clamped his teeth onto the edge of the datapad's housing, pulling it slowly, agonizingly, toward his face. He needed to send a distress beacon, coded with his military credentials, bypassing the civilian network. He used his tongue and lips to manipulate the touch screen, a crude but effective method. He input the code, Echo Delta 704. This was a distress frequency known only to a few remaining independent intelligence cells. He felt the vibration as the pad processed the input. Then, instead of a confirmation tone, the data pad began to heat rapidly against his cheek. It wasn't just transmitting, it was overloading. Varen desperately spat the device away. It clattered against the wall, its tiny indicator light blinking red in an unfamiliar, frantic pattern. The attempt had backfired spectacularly. The external comm system suddenly switched channels, not Kalen's voice, but a synthesized female drone. Asset location confirmed. Biosignature analysis complete. Transmission protocol failure detected. Preparing receiving vessel for expedited boarding and system purging. Time to rendezvous, 32 minutes. Varen stared at the blinking light on the data pad. That "We see you" message hadn't been a warning from an ally. It had been a sophisticated tracing beacon. The data pad was not a tool, it was a tracking device designed specifically to confirm Varen's location the moment he tried to use his old encrypted channels. He had just confirmed his identity and trajectory to the very people who were hunting him. Failure 2 was catastrophic. He hadn't just failed to escape, he had provided the exact information Earth Central needed to finalize their trap. Element new. Enters. The terrified witness. A soft, scraping sound came from the opposite side of the utility closet, near the ventilation grid. Veron, straining, managed to twist his neck enough to see. A section of the internal wall panel had been manually loosened, revealing not the main engineering duct, but a small crawl space used for plumbing maintenance. A face, smeared with grease and wide-eyed with terror, peered through the gap. It was Dr. Alara Shen, the ship's medical officer. Varan barely knew her. She kept to her sick bay, managing routine coughs and broken ankles. She was visibly shaking, holding a small, battery-powered maintenance cutter. "Varan," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "They won't let me near you. Captain Kalen locked down all medical access. He said you were contaminated. But I heard the comms about Theta 9 and the purge. That's not a debriefing, Varen. That's execution. For everyone." Ilara was not a trained operative or a technician. She was terrified, an unexpected ally who knew just enough to compromise everything. "Ilara," Varen managed, his voice raspy from the magnetic pressure squeezing his diaphragm. "Listen carefully. You need to get out of here. If Kalen finds you..." "No, I need to know why he's doing this. He took my access codes, Varen. He disabled my medical bay. I saw him uploading a massive data packet to the central drive 10 minutes ago. Something called the Omega Purity Protocol. What is he purging?" Ilara's eyes, usually tired but kind, were now burning with fear and sudden, desperate comprehension. She was realizing the true scope of Kalen's treason, not just against Varen, but against the crew and the truth of the massacre. "The evidence," Varen whispered. "He's purging the logs of the kinetic array firing all 3 ships. He's removing the digital footprint of the Earth fix and making sure the only record is the one he files, a heroic defense and a captured saboteur, me. Dilemma, trusting the unstable." Ilara pressed the cutter to the metal grating. "I can short the magnetic conduit," she said, her breath ragged. "I know the schematic for this compartment. I saw Kalen override the power levels earlier when he was strapping you in. If I cut the primary feed here, the restraint should drop for 30 seconds before the auxiliary battery kicks in." Varen hesitated. Ilara was a complete wild card. She was desperate, unstable, and could easily trigger an alert that would bring Kalen and Alistair down on them instantly. But without her, Varen would be delivered to the waiting trap ship, the evidence of his innocence erased by the Omega Purity Protocol. "Hurry, Ilara," Varen instructed, forcing tactical control into his voice. "Primary feed, blue coil, position 4. Bypass the thermal coupling, or you'll fry the whole system. You have 30 seconds. Use the timer on your watch." Ilara nodded, her hands shaking so violently the cutter danced dangerously close to the wrong wires. Varen felt a fresh wave of self-loathing. He was using this terrified woman as a tool, sacrificing her certainty, and perhaps her life, just as he had sacrificed Kara's by panicking and overriding the latency protocols years ago. He was a creature of calculated self-preservation, even when fighting for justice. He had to override the guilt. The lives of thousands of future crews depended on stopping the Omega Purity Protocol. Ilara plunged the cutter into the primary feed. There was a low, satisfying thwump. Instantly, the crushing magnetic field vanished. Varen fell forward onto the deck, breathing a gasp of relief that tasted like dust and ozone. The pain was still there, a deep ache in his muscles, but he was free. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing the heavy torque wrench he had abandoned outside the compartment. "Now, get out," Varen commanded, turning toward Ilara's maintenance crawl space. "Get to the bridge, lock yourself in the medbay access point, tell the crew everything, now." Ilara was frozen, the cutter still clutched in her hand. She stared past Varen, her eyes wide with a realization that was worse than the fear she had shown moments ago. "Varen, I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sudden, sharp, three-tone electronic chime that echoed throughout the ship. Varan whipped his head around. The comm system had just interrupted itself, overriding Kalen's silent protocol. The synthesized female voice returned, cold, final. G5P has reached rendezvous zone Theta 9, preparing docking procedures, confirming Omega Purity protocol initiated. Varan stared at Ilara. What did you see? Ilara didn't look at him. She looked at the abandoned maintenance cutter in her hand. When Kalen was setting the restraints, he didn't override the power levels. He locked them down, and he installed a failsafe. She pointed a trembling finger at the torque wrench Varen was holding. He knew you would try to escape. That chime, that wasn't the external confirmation. That was the failsafe. The instant the magnetic field dropped, it triggered the Omega Purity protocol. It's already started purging the logs. Varen felt the floor vibrate, not with acceleration, but with the steady, heavy thrum of a much larger vessel pulling alongside the G5P. He had failed his last chance. The log purge was already underway, and the trap ship was docking. He looked at Ilara, whose face now reflected pure, unadulterated horror. He had used her, and in doing so, he had sealed the fate of the only evidence of Earth Central's crime. Then, through the external speakers, Kalen's voice, now amplified and echoing with terrifying authority, cut through the tension. Welcome, G5P. Initiate full lockdown. Earth Central security vessel, the Architect, is now docking. We have our package. The chime had been a notification, not a warning. It signaled a system achieving its desired operational state. The Architect, a shadow swallowing the faint starlight, was now a physical presence alongside the G5P. Varen felt the low grind of the docking collars engaging, a sound of inevitable surrender. He shoved the heavy torque wrench into the slot of his utility trousers, ignoring the deep ache in his limbs from the magnetic restraints. Ilara was still frozen, staring into the crawl space, her panic amplifying the sterile dread in the air. Get back into the sickbay, Ilara, Varen commanded, his voice sharp and low. Lock it down. Now. Theta, 9 is a containment zone, she whispered, shaking her head slowly. They'll eliminate the entire crew for exposure. They always do. Kalen knows this. Kalen is already gone, Varen bit out. He chose his side. I need to get to the main processor before the purge finishes. He grabbed Ilara's arm, pulling her roughly out of the maintenance hole. She stumbled, but her fear lent her motion. They burst from the utility closet and sprinted down the narrow engineering spine toward the bridge access, the strip lights blurring into orange smears. They found Captain Kalen at the main bridge access terminal. He wasn't waiting for boarding. He was calmly inputting a final sequence, his face illuminated by the green glow of his personal console, the picture of professional composure. "Captain!" Varen shouted, sliding to a stop 20 feet away. The magnetic floor plates shuddered slightly as Kalen's back straightened. Kalen turned, no surprise in his eyes, only profound exhaustion. "I expected you to be secured longer, Varen. The doctor is resourceful." He nodded toward Ilara, who stood behind Varen, panting, clutching the fiber cutter like a talisman. "The purge," Varen demanded. "Stop the Omega Purity protocol. The logs are the only evidence that Earth Central sanctioned the attack on the raiders." Kalen sighed, a sound heavy with years of moral decay. "The Omega Purity protocol is the only thing saving you right now, Varen, and potentially the rest of the crew." Varen paused, recognizing the twisted logic in Kalen's tone. "What are you talking about?" Kalen gestured toward the screen. The display showed the status of the kinetic weapon array. It was dark, but beside it, a secondary data stream flowed. It was encrypted, running 40 years of high-priority telemetry. "The fix was not about defense, Varen," Kalen explained, his voice losing its professional facade, revealing a chilling competence Varen had missed until now. "The fix was telemetry. It tracked the moment you bypassed protocol to shut down the array. It tracked the muscle memory, the efficiency, the speed of your reaction. It confirmed your deep cover status. Veron felt the blood drain from his face. It wasn't about the pirates or the cargo. It was always about him. The original fix was simply to reactivate the kinetic array and see if a dormant asset would attempt a surgical intervention. Kalen continued, stepping toward Varen, his eyes locked onto his former technician. You were the target, Varen, not the pirates. Earth Central needed to confirm that the training we gave you, the training we gave all the stabilization assets, had survived 20 years of civilian latency. Kalen pointed toward the incoming security vessel, visible now through the bridge viewport, a black, armored monolith. The Architect. That ship isn't here to file a report. It's here to extract you, Varen. And not just your body, your neural data, your unique combat to technical transference skills. They need to understand how we train men to choose efficiency over human latency. They want the entire data package transferred directly from your brain to their databases. That process is rarely survivable. Varen stumbled back a half step. We see you. That message hadn't been an ally finding him. It had been confirmation that the asset was ready for extraction. He was not a technician, not a deserter, not a fugitive. He was a resource, a laboratory specimen. And Kara? Varen forced the name out, the sound ripping his throat. Kalen met his gaze, devoid of sympathy. Kara's incident 3 weeks ago was a localized, controlled system failure. We needed to test your emotional response under trauma, to see if the guilt could be leveraged. You failed to save her, Varen, but you provided excellent data on stress-induced protocol overrides. The Omega Purity Protocol? Kalen spread his hands, a gesture of terrible inevitability. It's destroying the ship's logs, yes, but its primary function is to trigger a complete system meltdown in 10 minutes before the Architect can complete the neural extraction. A clean death, Varen. Suicide by system failure. It's the only way to ensure your skills, our methodology, doesn't fall into the hands of Earth Central's research division. The revelation struck Varen like a kinetic blast. Kalen hadn't betrayed him for money. He had betrayed him for control, attempting to destroy the asset before it could be misused. Kalen, the captain, was a deep cover operative, and the massacre of the pirates had been a horrific, necessary test orchestrated by Kalen himself. Varen felt the world tilt. His entire existence since his desertion, the guilt over Kara, the quiet life, the technical expertise he relied on, was a cage, a simulation designed to mature the data Earth needed. Every panic, every choice was logged. He was a lab rat who had just realized the cage was designed specifically to maximize his performance. He stared at his hands, those steady hands that had spent 20 years trying to fix the small failures of mechanical systems. He wasn't good. He wasn't competent. He was programmed. Self-judgment. He looked into the reflective metal wall. Not a technician. Not a good man trying to atone. He was a weapon designed for ruthless efficiency, whose secondary function was guilt. He chose to save Kara in his mind to avoid confronting the greater systemic horror. He was a coward who had mistaken his trauma for a conscience. The dilemma was now perfectly clear. Option A, the pragmatist. Let Kalen finish the sequence, die in the system meltdown with the crew, taking Varen's data with them, denying Earth Central the ultimate prize. He accepts the genocide of the crew for a greater strategic good, protecting the training methodology. Option B, the idealist. Fight Kalen, stop the Omega Purity Protocol, but if he stops it, the Architect will dock, Varen will be extracted, his entire life dissected, and the Earth Central program will be perfected and deployed on a galactic scale, ensuring future massacres are even more efficient. He saves the crew from the immediate explosion, but sacrifices himself and accelerates the future horror. Kalen looked at Varen, his expression softening into something almost paternal. "You have 3 minutes left, Varen. I cannot stop the Omega Protocol myself now. The key is hard-coded to the captain's biometrics. You must decide whether to stop me or let the inevitable occur." Varan saw Ilara's face, pale with terror. She had trusted him, a terrified witness who had risked everything. Could he let Kalen kill her? Kill everyone for a philosophical victory against data extraction? He looked at Kalen's console. The timer blinked. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. The destruction of the G5P and its crew was only moments away. "I will not allow an automated system to make my moral choices again." The thought exploded in Varan's mind, pure, hot rage overriding decades of self-control. It was the system that killed Kara, not latency. It was the system that executed the pirates, and it was the system that Kalen was using now to decide life and death. Varen chose B, the impossible fight for immediate, tangible human life. Consequences be damned. He didn't speak. He moved. Varen lunged, not toward Kalen's console, but toward the captain himself. He grabbed the heavy torque wrench from his trousers and brought it down in a tight, practiced arc. Kalen was fast. Years of deep cover training kept him sharp. He dodged the main force of the blow, but the heavy steel end glanced off his shoulder plate with a sickening crack. Kalen staggered back, clutching his shoulder. "Varen, don't be a fool. You're accelerating the inevitable." Varen pressed the attack, driving Kalen away from the console and toward the viewport. It was messy, brutal, focused on incapacitation, not elegance. He used the wrench as a lever, jamming it against Kalen's ribs. Kalen let out a choked gasp, falling back against the reinforced glass. Ilara screamed, a high, panicked sound, and scrambled out of the way. The fight was over in 10 seconds. Varan pressed the wrench against Kalen's throat, forcing him to release the security override on the console. Varan lunged for the screen. 1 minute, 50 seconds. He slammed his palm onto the sequence Kalen had just input, attempting a force abort on the Omega Purity Protocol. Error. Command access denied. Kalen slumped against the viewport, chuckled, the sound wet and ragged. "Too late, Varen. The sequence is locked. Only the initiating commander can override it, and my biometrics are now flagged for immediate quarantine by the Architect." "You stopped nothing." Varen slammed his hand onto the console again, desperation overcoming his discipline. He used the fiber cutter, blindly slicing into the keyboard membrane. 1 minute, 30 seconds. Suddenly, the screen changed. The timer vanished, replaced by a single pulsing command line. Kalen Protocol override initiated. Varen froze. Kalen had been lying about the self-destruct key. He hadn't just initiated the Omega Protocol, he had also built in a failsafe override, accessible only when the system detected physical duress on the captain, Varen's attack. Kalen wasn't trying to die. He was trying to shift control. "You idiot!" Kalen gasped, blood trickling from his lip. "The Architect is here for us." The override is a final extraction command. It shifts the asset classification from research to operative. Before Varen could process this, Kalen reached out with his uninjured hand, his fingers moving with impossible speed across the damaged keyboard. He typed a single final line of code. "Varen asset designation, traitor, execute Omega Purity Protocol, maximum duration." The console screamed red. The ship began to shake violently, not from docking, but from internal pressure building rapidly. The Omega Purity Protocol hadn't been aborted, it had been amplified. Kalen smiled, a final, triumphant expression of deep cover loyalty. "Now we both get to watch. You fought the lie, Varen. You always did. And now you're going to pay for the truth." Kalen's head slumped, his body going instantly slack. Varen stared at the console. The self-destruct countdown was now frozen, replaced by a progress bar filling rapidly. The system was no longer deleting logs. It was actively corrupting them, ensuring that the historical data was not just purged, but replaced with fabrications that painted Varen as a rogue operative who murdered Kalen to stop a security upgrade. The true, horrifying cost of his desperate fight crashed down on him. He had stopped Kalen from taking them all out cleanly, only to accelerate the destruction of all evidence and guarantee his own branding as the ultimate scapegoat. "What did he do?" Ilara sobbed, clutching her head. Varen looked up at the main viewport. The docking clamps from the architect were fully engaged. He heard the heavy hiss of pressurized air as the external airlock sealed. "He didn't kill the system, Ilara," Varen said, his voice flat with finality. "He killed the story, and he ensured that the only version they believe is the one where I am the terrorist." Varen felt the deck plates hum beneath his boots. The corruption bar hit 99%. As the final logs were overwritten, the massive security vessel completed its system's handshake. A new designation flashed briefly on the main tactical screen, bleeding through the firewall. G5P, Sector Theta 9. Target acquired, Veron, Agent 4 Delta 7. Priority, capture alive. Data extraction imminent. They knew his old name. Veron looked down at the unresponsive body of Kalen, the man who had loved him enough to try to kill him cleanly. Varen had fought for his integrity, and in doing so, he had handed Earth Central the perfect narrative and the perfect asset. He had not sabotaged the project, he had delivered it. The ship's inner door seals hissed, announcing the arrival of the boarding party. Varen grabbed the wrench. He knew exactly what was coming now. He wasn't fighting pirates or protocols. He was fighting his past, which had just caught up to him. Before we proceed, log your entry. Which country or planet are you watching from right now? The commander is tracking every active signal. The price of Varen's immediate survival arrived faster than he expected, and was exponentially heavier than any death Kalen had planned. The airlock seal hissed, a sound of mechanized finality. Varen reacted instantly, pulling Ilara toward the nearest service hatch, but he was too slow, too drained by the lingering effects of the magnetic restraints and the fight with Kalen. The inner hatch slid open with a smooth, silent efficiency the G5P had never possessed. The boarding party was not a military squad. It was a surgical unit, 3 figures in clean, armored whites, moving with synchronized, chilling precision. They didn't shout orders. They merely executed procedures. Veron lifted the torque wrench, but a targeted pulse from the lead figure's non-lethal emitter slammed into his chest, paralyzing his diaphragm for a crucial half-second. When Veron gasped for air, the second figure was already on him, applying advanced biodampeners to his wrists and ankles. These were not the crude magnetic straps of the cargo ship. They were tailored composites that molded to his skin, humming with a low-frequency hum that suppressed muscle movement down to the cellular level. He felt his rage dissipate into a numb, useless tremor. Ilara screamed, but her sound was cut short by the third figure, who applied a neural suppressor patch to the back of her neck. She went instantly limp, caught before she fell. "Witness containment complete," the lead figure stated into their helmet mic, their voice synthesized and flat. "Asset is secured. Transfer to the Architect Processing Suite. Expedite Phase 1 extraction." Varen was dragged across the deck, past Kalen's slack body, into the sterile, unforgiving environment of the security vessel. The air here was colder, recycled perfectly, smelling only of ozone and surgical steel. He was no longer a person, he was cargo, and the destination was the extraction table. He was strapped to a smooth, composite slab in a room that glowed with blinding, clinical white light. Above him, a complex array of emitters and optical sensors hummed, preparing for data transfer. Veron tried to focus his eyes, but the light was too intense, forcing him to track the operation through sheer peripheral desperation. A woman entered the chamber, moving with the languid authority of someone who managed life and death as a ledger entry. Dr. Mera. She wore the stark uniform of Earth Central's research division, a designation Veron knew meant efficiency above ethics. Agent 4 Delta 7, Mara stated, her voice calm and devoid of inflection. Or do you prefer Veron? The logs, Veron managed, his voice a strained whisper against the powerful suppressors. The Omega Purity Protocol. What did Kalen do? Mara smiled, a thin, unnerving expression. Captain Kalen performed his final duty with admirable loyalty. He ensured that your narrative was perfectly tailored for systemic ingestion. She gestured toward a wall-sized screen that activated behind her. It displayed the final, official log file of the G5P. The text was clean, finalized, and absolute. Incident report. G5P security breach. Rogue Agent Veron, identified as a long-term operative of the illegal Serafina resistance cell, hijacked the vessel's newly installed security patch. Veron murdered Captain Kalen and attempted to destroy the ship's logs to cover the theft of classified targeting software. All crew members confirmed to be victims of Veron's destabilization attempt. The architect intervened to secure the asset before full sabotage. Veron felt a wave of nausea, worse than the kinetic blast from the kinetic array. He had chosen to live to expose the truth, and in doing so, he had guaranteed that the only truth that survived was the lie. He was the pirate now, the terrorist, the murderer. The system had inverted his moral reality perfectly. Your fight against Kalen, Mara continued, adjusting the neural input array above his head, was logged as violent resistance against a loyal officer attempting to secure the vessel. The crew now believes you are a psychopath who endangered them all. The data is already broadcast across the sector. Your story is sealed, Veron. Your evidence is garbage. She stepped closer, her eyes focusing on the suppressors. You sacrificed Kalen's moral choice, a clean death for the data, for a momentary ideological victory. And in return, you handed us the perfect weapon, a validated, high-priority asset, fully isolated, with a public narrative that justifies any level of coercive extraction. Veron looked at the screen, then at his hands, immobilized on the cold slab. He saw Kara's face in his memory, the memory of his failure compounded by guilt. He saw Kalen's paternal, desperate gaze before he slumped, content in his final, catastrophic act of sabotage. He had fought systems his whole life, the bureaucracy that failed Kara, the automation that executed the pirates, the deep cover strategy that trapped him, but he had fundamentally failed to grasp the scale of the fight. He had fought the manifestation, never the architecture. Self-judgment. Why had he lunged at Kalen? Why hadn't he accepted the explosion? He closed his eyes, tasting the bitterness of ultimate self-inflicted defeat. It wasn't about saving Ilara, or the crew, or the truth. It was ego. He had refused to accept the passive surrender of death. He was a coward who always needed to do something, mistaking movement for meaning. He was programmed to fight, and that programming had delivered him right into the lab. Begin Phase 1 extraction, Mara commanded, stepping back. Focus on motor efficiency transfer. We want to catalog the decision points leading to the override sequence. A high-frequency whine began in the array above Veron. He felt a sharp, intrusive pressure behind his eyes, a sensation of cold needles probing deep into the folds of his brain. It was not painful yet, but utterly invasive, a systematic dissection of his life's training. As the pressure intensified, Veron's mind, battered and fragmented, attempted to find an anchor. The physical restraints were powerful, but designed for general containment. The neural suppression was severe, targeting movement. He focused on the dampeners on his wrists. They drew power directly from the slab, a standardized high-amp current. The flaw was not in Mara's cutting-edge tech, but in the interface that married the slab to the G5P's obsolete power core, which was still running emergency diagnostics after the purge. Varen remembered the overwhelming magnetic force from the G5P's utility closet. When he was released, a tiny, residual bioelectric charge, a byproduct of extreme magnetic confinement, had lingered in his muscular system. He could feel that echo now, a faint, metallic taste in his mouth. He was experiencing severe neural disruption, but the suppressors hadn't accounted for an asset trained to use physical trauma as an energy source. If he could force his remaining biological energy into a precise, directed burst, not of movement, but of electromagnetic interference, he might short the localized dampeners on his left wrist for a fraction of a second. The exertion would likely trigger a cerebral hemorrhage. He would be useless afterward, assuming he survived the attempt. But if he could move his hand for 3 seconds, he had a chance. Mara was focused on the extraction readout, observing the raw data streaming onto her console. The extraction was successful, the speed of Varen's internal processing astonishingly efficient. "Excellent," Mayra murmured, adjusting a dial. "The fear response is isolated, but the efficiency index holds at 97%. Remarkable stability under duress." 3 seconds. That was all he needed to reach the slab's small, armored local data access port, a port Mayra was using to manage the data streams, positioned inches from his left hand. Varen didn't think about the pain, didn't think about Kara or Kalen or the fabricated logs. He thought only about his old combat instructor's cruel mantra: "You are a conduit. Use what you have." He forced every residual joule of bioelectric energy into his left arm. The sensation was immediate and searing, a burning wave that threatened to turn his brain into soup. He felt capillaries bursting behind his eyes, the pressure overwhelming. Shh! The suppression field around his left wrist flickered. The composite dampener momentarily went slack, the metal against his skin losing its binding force. Varen moved. He twisted his wrist, ripping his hand free of the dampener just as the surge of pain peaked. He didn't scream. He didn't have the breath. His hand, now free, was convulsing, covered in fresh blood from where the pressure had lacerated his skin. His fingers clawed desperately for the local data port. He had to insert a foreign object to breach the security seal. The torque wrench was gone, left on the G5PO, but Alara's fiber cutter, the tiny, powerful tool she had used to cut the restraints, was still tucked into his utility trousers, where the boarding party hadn't bothered to check. They were only interested in the neural interface. Varen managed to snag the tool with his damaged fingers. 1 second. He rammed the tip of the fiber cutter into the data port. The security indicator on the port flashed red, then green. Varen managed to tap the cutter against the internal contacts, forcing a hardwired connection. He needed to transmit a signal, not a distress beacon. That would be intercepted. He needed to transmit his data, the raw, unadulterated feed of the neural extraction Mayra was currently pulling from his brain. He didn't have time to decrypt it or encrypt it. He just needed to send it raw, unmanaged, across the general network before the system locked the port. 2 seconds. Varen slammed his palm onto the cutter, forcing the data flow. The local port screamed an overload warning. 3 seconds. Mara's head whipped around, her eyes widening in genuine shock as the extraction readout glitched violently. "He's diverting the stream. Override local I/O now." Varen felt the dampeners slam back into place on his wrist, this time at double intensity, the pressure crushing his bone. But he held the cutter in place for another agonizing half-second. ensuring the initial burst of data, the most volatile, the most damning, the raw memory of the kinetic array firing, was ejected. Mayera lunged for the console to cut the feed. Varen's entire body spasmed, the electrical feedback from the suppressors combining with the hemorrhaging in his skull. His vision went white, then black, then fractured into sharp, jagged lines. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He had achieved the impossible, but he was completely defeated, utterly exposed. The data port stabilized. The transfer halted. Myra looked from the crippled port to Varen's convulsing body. She didn't look angry. She looked intrigued. Remarkable resilience, 4 Delta 7, she stated, clicking a tongue depressor against Varen's unresponsive left arm, testing for damage. You failed to stop the corruption, but you successfully attempted a raw data stream of your extraction process. She turned back to her console, her fingers flying across the interface. The external network was already scrubbing the brief, rogue burst of data Varen had sent. It would be gone in milliseconds. But then, Myra's face paled slightly. She wasn't looking at the suppression logs. She was looking at the external transfer confirmation. No, she whispered, her clinical composure breaking for the first time. That signal didn't route to the general network. She enlarged the destination address of Varen's desperate data burst. It was a single, cryptic code. Archive 734K, Deep Core. Varen knew that code. It was the secure, decommissioned data vault for Earth Central's historical records. Records supposedly sealed off from all active networks, meant to store the forgotten operational histories of the stabilization assets, the history of the very training methodology Mayera was trying to extract. The data Varen had just sent wasn't sent to an ally. It was sent to a historical archive. The file would be instantly flagged for deletion, trapped in a bureaucratic purgatory. Myra regained her control, her face hardening into a mask of pure fury. She grabbed a comm unit. Alert! Agent 4 Delta 7 has physically compromised the extraction interface. Initiate lockdown protocols on Archive 734K. Flag data transfer for immediate deletion. The system immediately confirmed the order. The fate of Varen's raw data, the true story, was now tied to a data deletion command in a forgotten, bureaucratic deep archive. But as Mara turned to subdue Varen entirely, a faint, metallic scent, sharp and familiar, wafted into the surgical chamber through the ventilation system. It was the smell of high-grade plasma coolant mixing with hot ozone, the lingering residue of the G5P's engine spine, and with it a small localized flicker in the chamber's environmental lighting. Varen, paralyzed but dimly conscious, saw Mara's eyes snap up to the ceiling ventilation grid. A sound followed, a faint, distinct click of metal on metal, too deliberate to be a mechanical failure. It was the sound of a specialized cutter engaging against reinforced metal. Myra's hand went instantly to her sidearm. Security, intrusion in the processing suite ventilation shaft, target designation, unsecured witness Ilara Shen, neutralize immediately. Varen's damaged mind grasped the truth. Ilara had not been fully subdued. She wasn't trying to escape. She was moving through the service ducts of the architect itself, guided by the familiar sense of the G5P's coolant trails that still clung to the docking collar. She had followed him. The system AI controlling the suppression slab pulsed an urgent warning directly into Varen's broken mind. Warning: local power grid integrity compromised. External power fluctuation detected. Ilara wasn't there to save Varen. She was performing a crude, desperate maneuver. She was forcing the G5P's obsolete, unstable auxiliary power, which she had previously manipulated to free Varen, to momentarily backfeed into Wu, the architect's local grid, through the docking collar connections. Varen knew what she was doing. It was insane, suicidal, and entirely useless for escape. but it would overload the local network hub for exactly 15 seconds. 15 seconds of network chaos. 15 seconds of Mayera's deletion command being paused, buffered, and potentially lost in a moment of systemic panic. 15 seconds for Varen's raw data, trapped in the archive 734K purgatory, to move from deletion queue back to active archive. Varen felt the first surge of electrical feedback from the destabilized grid hit the slab. Mayera was already aiming her weapon at the ventilation shaft. "You cannot save him, witness," Mayera screamed, firing a warning shot that tore a hole in the ventilation grill. Varen's last thought, before the systemic shock knocked him into blackness, was terrifyingly clear. The true fight was never about escaping or surviving. It was about latency. 15 seconds of chaos. 15 seconds of a chance to weaponize bureaucracy itself. And Ilara, the terrified, untrained witness, had just provided the distraction. Now, Varen just had to survive long enough for that tiny, forgotten historical record to become their future. The systemic shock, fueled by Ilara's desperate backfeed, hit Varen with the force of an unseen hammer. The blinding white light of the surgical chamber fractured, turning the room into a strobe of jagged, painful edges. Varen's body, already weakened by the biodampeners, convulsed violently against the restraining slab. It was a complete physical failure, but in that moment, his lack of control became his greatest asset. The system AI, distracted by the severe power fluctuation and Mayera's frantic shouts directed at the ventilation shaft, momentarily lost centralized control over the neural array. The invasive pressure behind Varen's eyes vanished, replaced by a searing internal burn. The feedback from his own body's forced bioelectric discharge, attempting to maintain contact with the fiber cutter, still jammed into the data port. Mayera, focused entirely on neutralizing the physical threat above her, fired her sidearm again. The blast missed Ilara but ripped through the ductwork with a sound like tearing fabric. Security, prioritize the ventilation shaft. Override local power regulation, Mayera screamed into her comm. The system responded instantly, but with latency. The power stabilization took 5 critical seconds. 5 seconds Varen used not for conscious thought, but for raw, twitching persistence. The convulsions were forcing the fiber cutter deeper into the access port. He could feel the fine, sharp edge cutting into the sensitive internal contacts, forcing a catastrophic surge of outbound data. You are a conduit. Use what you have. What he had was failure, a body chemically depleted, a nervous system compromised, and a mind fractured by guilt. He pushed the residual pain from the cerebral hemorrhaging back into the biodampeners, creating a loop that further destabilized the local power supply. The light flickered violently, casting long, erratic shadows that made Mayera look like a monster lunging between console and ventilation shaft. 4 Delta 7, cease transmission. Mayera finally pivoted, realizing Varen's stillness was a lie, that his true fight was happening on the data plane. She slammed her palm onto the console interface, initiating the final termination sequence on the local data port. But Varen was faster. He didn't need to defeat Mayera's hardware. He needed to exploit the momentary chaos of the network. He forced the raw data stream, the entire damning log of his extraction process, including the unprocessed memory of the kinetic array firing at the running raiders, into a recursive loop, not just into the archive 734K folder, but onto the archive's active deletion queue. The archive wasn't designed for integrity. It was designed for efficient destruction. Mayera's standing order was, delete this data immediately. Varen's current command was, spam the deletion queue with this massive file over and over. The local data port began to smoke. You have the deletion order, Doctor, Varen rasped, his voice barely audible, his throat raw. But how long does bureaucracy take to kill the truth when it's choked on evidence? Mayera stared at the primary readout. Her face, usually a mask of detached competence, showed a terrifying blend of intellectual frustration and growing rage. The 15-second window was closing. Ilara's crude EMP had done its job. It hadn't stopped the deletion, but it had introduced enough network latency that the massive file Varen was forcing through was now choking the archive's internal processing speed. "You're just delaying the inevitable, Varen," Mara said, her voice now dangerously low, overriding the system alarms. "You think you can save the truth? That data is raw, unverifiable, and sourced from a known compromised asset. It confirms the lie we've already broadcast. You're simply ensuring your suffering is maximized before the final deletion." Mara reached for the neural agent interface, preparing to subdue him permanently. The system always wins, agent, because the system is built on logic. Your actions are driven by irrational guilt over a technician named Kara, a human latency we specifically designed to be exploited. "No," Varen managed, his eyes locking onto Mara's. The raw pain of his internal bleeding felt distant, secondary to the sharp clarity of his final realization. It wasn't guilt over Kara that drove me. It was the system that failed her. It wasn't the pirates that drove me. It was the system that executed them. I am driven by the necessity of Kori's latency, the time between a decision and its consequence. You eliminate latency, you eliminate moral choice. I don't need to win. I just need to create enough delay, enough friction for the consequence of your actions to catch up to you. The power stabilized completely. The surgical chamber lights went blindingly steady. Ilara's backfeed was cut off. Mara's deletion command, buffered for 15 seconds, was now executing at full speed. Mara watched the external network indicator on her console. Too late. Deletion confirmed. Archive 734K purge is 99% complete. Varen felt the final, draining surrender of his bioenergy. His grip slackened. The fiber cutter fell out of the port with a tiny metallic tink, clattering onto the surgical slab. He had failed. But then, the indicator flashed again. Mara slammed her fist onto the console, confirming her own meticulous failure. No. The recursive spam corrupted the execution signature. Mara shrieked, the sound raw and unprofessional. The system didn't delete the data. It flagged the massive file size as a low-priority error and moved it into a pending review. A single small fragment of Varen's raw data, the memory of the kinetic array firing, was not purged. It was now trapped in bureaucratic purgatory, waiting for a human technician, years or decades from now, to clear the backlog and investigate the error. Varen hadn't won a battle. He had weaponized administrative incompetence. Mara turned on Varen, her eyes burning with pure, focused hatred. She had spent a career perfecting system efficiency, and Varen had just proven that complexity breeds vulnerability. "You are a cancer on the system. 4 Delta 7, she spat. She grabbed a syringe from the nearby tray. "I cannot extract your skills without frying your corrupted cortex, and I cannot allow you to die cleanly. That is a luxury Kalen afforded you. I will use what I have." She plunged the needle into Varen's neck. The solution was cool, metallic, followed by a rush of heat. "This is a neurostabilizer cocktail," Mara explained, her voice regaining its chilling, clinical tone. "It halts the cerebral hemorrhaging. You will survive the extraction attempt. You will live." Varen tried to speak, but his jaw was locked. "But it also halts all internal repair mechanisms," Mara continued, tapping the empty syringe. "The physical damage you inflicted on yourself, the nerve damage, the tremors, the constant pain from forcing the bioelectric output, is now permanent. You will never regain the fine motor control you prize so highly. You will live, Varen, but you will live as a broken tool, dependent on this system for every second of your useless existence. The physical cost of your victory is everything. You are." Mara stepped back, her composure fully restored. Varen was alive, but completely shattered, physically and functionally defeated. A security team entered the chamber, dragging Ilara with them. The young doctor was pale but conscious, a patch removed from her neck. She looked at Varen, her eyes wide with shock, then down at the fiber cutter on the slab. She understood. Varen looked at Ilara, recognizing the terrible necessary trade-off. He had not saved her, but she had saved his intention. She was alive, traumatized, and now a key witness to the price of his latency. Mara motioned to the security team, contain the witness, log the asset for Phase 2 interrogation. He is stable, but useless for extraction. As Varen was unstrapped from the slab, his body slumped instantly, his limbs heavy and unresponsive. He had to be carried. The tremor in his left hand was immediately visible, a rapid, uncontrollable shake, a constant reminder of the internal violence required to send that single, tiny file into the archive backlog. He was the technician who could no longer operate. He looked at Mayera, a faint, bitter smile touching his lips. He finally understood his identity. He wasn't a good man fighting a bad system. He was merely an anomaly, a persistent error in the equation. He had accepted the cost. He chose the struggle, and the struggle had made him permanently unfit for anything else. I am not a hero. I am the price. The security team dragged Varen toward the exit. As they passed the slab, Mayera paused, retrieving the fallen fiber cutter. She looked at the small, bloodied tool, then at the unresponsive figure of Varen. You bought time, Varen, she whispered, her voice a final, cold acknowledgement of their stalemate. But time only serves those who can outlast it, and you are already broken. She tossed the fiber cutter into the waste disposal unit, the metal object clanging against the steel. The final sound of that confrontation was not an explosion, but the small, hollow resonance of something essential being discarded. Veron's truth was safe, sequestered in a bureaucratic vault, but Veron himself was now a prisoner of his own damaged body, heading into a future where the only thing he could do was wait for that ancient file to be discovered. The door hissed open, leading Varen and Ilara out of the sterile lab and deeper into the belly of the Architect. They were alive, but utterly defeated, carrying the weight of a microscopic victory that might take centuries to matter. Their journey had not ended. It had merely shifted from the fight for survival to the endurance of consequence. 3 months. The sterile, surgical white of the Architect had given way to the dull, oppressive gray of the long-haul detention block. Varen was no longer restrained on the slab, but the freedom was theoretical. He was confined to a small, nutrient-fed cell, a luxury afforded to high-value assets deemed too unstable for extraction, yet too dangerous to eliminate. He sat on the narrow bench, his back rigid, staring at the polished composite floor. The hum of the Architect was constant here, a sound of unyielding, efficient control, unlike the familiar, aging thrum of the G5P key. This deep space security vessel didn't vibrate with the stress of deceleration burns or kinetic recoil. It maintained a perfect, agonizing stillness. His left hand rested on his knee, the focus of his new, permanent reality. The tremor was relentless, a rapid, shallow vibration that traveled from his wrist up to his shoulder, rendering the fine motor control he had defined his life by utterly useless. He attempted to pick up the standard nutrient bar provided for his meal. His fingers seized, missing the smooth, cylindrical object by centimeters. The bar fell, sliding across the slick floor. He stared at the bar. The technician who had spent 20 years navigating power conduits with surgical precision could no longer feed himself without effort. Myra had kept her promise. He was alive, but permanently broken, a living monument to the cost of his momentary victory. Kalen had been cremated, a hero. His fabricated report of the rogue technician Varen murdering him to steal the newly installed defensive systems, had been officially archived across the entire core system. The pirates were simply collateral damage in the sanctioned conflict. Varen's name, the quiet name of a technician who just wanted to keep systems running, was now synonymous with terrorist sabotage. The narrative was perfect, clean, and irreversible. Varan did not feel guilt over Kalen's death anymore, only profound sadness for the man's loyalty to a cause that demanded such hideous sacrifice. Kalen had chosen death for them all to protect the methodology. Varan had chosen life and long-term suffering to expose the lie. Both men were captured in the same system, playing out their pre-programmed moral roles. Varan knew the location of Alara. She was 2 decks down, in the witness evaluation ward. They had separated her, the traumatized, uncompromised civilian, from the asset, allowing her recovery to proceed so she could eventually testify to the official lie that Varen was insane and Kalen was heroic. Her testimony, while true to her perception, would only reinforce the narrative created by the Omega Purity Protocol. The only thing that mattered was the data fragment trapped in bureaucratic purgatory. Archive 734K. Pending review. He had bought time, latency, the delay required for a human being, a low-level bureaucratic drone, to eventually stumble upon a massive, anomalous file choking the system backlog. It could be 10 years, 50, a century. Varan might not live to see it, but the memory was secure. That was the only victory he was permitted. A dull thunk sounded outside his cell door. It wasn't a security alert. It was the soft chime of the automated food delivery cart. The door panel hissed open, and Varen watched a clean, mechanical arm deposit a fresh nutrient bar and a synthesized liquid packet onto his bench. He attempted to pick up the packet of fluid. Again, the tremor ruined the attempt, sending a small amount splashing onto the floor. He heard a soft sigh from the outer corridor. Not a guard, but a technician. A young man Varen had only seen briefly during shifts. "You're supposed to report that," the technician said softly, his voice muffled by the thick door. "Spillage requires biohazard protocol. They'll dock your intake points." Varan didn't look up. He scraped his right hand against the bench, gathering his limited strength. "Why don't you use the voice command interface?" the technician asked, a genuine note of curiosity and mild concern in his voice. "It's faster, more efficient." Varan finally managed to lever the nutrient bar up against the wall, gripping it tightly with his functional right hand. Efficient. "Efficiency removes choice," Varan rasped, the words scratching his dry throat. It was the only response he would give to anyone asking why he did anything now. The technician paused. "I don't understand, Agent 4 Delta 7. "No," Varen said. "You don't, and that's why you'll be safe." The technician did not press the issue. He moved on, the sound of his soft, magnetic boots disappearing down the corridor. Varen was alone again, with the perfect constant hum of the control system. His future was laid out for him. Prolonged, useless imprisonment until Earth Central decided the data extraction, useless as it was, could proceed without fear of further contamination. He would exist as an expensive error, monitored, fed, and utterly stagnant. Yet Varen refused the oblivion of self-pity. He did not fight the tremor anymore. He observed it. He quantified the pain. He measured the delay between the intention to move and the physical failure. It was his new discipline. He was the perpetual student of his own brokenness, a walking experiment in human latency. He found solace in this strange, permanent cost. The constant pain was not penitence. It was a certificate of authenticity. It was the undeniable physical proof that in the final moments, under the ultimate duress, he had chosen human consequence over systemic efficiency. He had fought the automated, cold logic of his trainers and won a single, microscopic point the ability to delay the inevitable truth just long enough for it to become a problem for his captors. One morning, Varen woke to a new sound. It wasn't the high-frequency whine of Myra's extraction equipment, nor the smooth thrum of the architect. It was a harsh scraping noise, followed by the faint scent of metal dust. His door hissed open wider than usual. A security escort stood ready, but this time he was not their focus. Myra was there too, her face lined with exhaustion, not anger. She looked haggard, her uniform slightly rumpled. "Agent," she said, her voice flat. "We are diverting. Transfer to Sector 3, holding facility Tarsus." Varen noticed the activity down the corridor. Workers in heavy gear were dismantling sections of the high-security detention block. Cables were exposed, sparking faintly. "The architect is offline for unexpected maintenance," Myra explained, reading the question in his eyes. "The localized network interference you created months ago caused an error signature in the auxiliary power routing. It wasn't critical, but the backlog of low-priority diagnostic requests reached a tipping point. We have to shut down the core loop for a hard reset." Varen felt a wave of icy, pragmatic realization wash over him. His chaotic, last-ditch effort hadn't just created latency in the archive. It had created friction everywhere. The system, designed for relentless efficiency, was incapable of prioritizing administrative cleanup over physical survival. "The price of perfect logic," Varen managed, his voice a gravelly whisper. Myra did not meet his eyes. "You are the price, Varen. The system absorbs you. You do not absorb it." He was hoisted onto a transport sled, the tremor in his hand shaking uncontrollably against the cool metal rail. As they moved toward the external transfer airlock, they passed the witness evaluation ward. Ilara was waiting at the opaque viewport, escorted by a single guard. She was pale, but her eyes held a new, hard determination. She looked at Varen's shaking hand, then down the corridor where the technicians were scrambling to fix the auxiliary power. She didn't speak, but she offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was not pity, nor was it forgiveness. It was recognition. She was the human consequence. He was the technical price. And she had understood the final lesson. The fight was never about escaping. It was about creating the problem. Varen was wheeled into the transfer lock, the heavy doors sealing shut behind him and Myra. The sound was deafening, metallic, and final. He was a broken technician, unable to fix, unable to fight. He was the ghost in the machine, preserved only because his failure was too complex for the system to quickly process. His victory was not freedom or justice or redemption. It was the simple, brute fact of his existence, the continuing anomaly in the equation, destined to wait centuries for a low-level clerk to finally open the pending review folder and stumble upon the raw, damning truth. He looked at his hand, vibrating uselessly. The violent, deafening shriek of the kinetic array that had launched this entire catastrophic sequence was long gone, purged from the active record. Only the low, familiar thrum of the system, always waiting, always demanding control, endured. And Varen, broken but present, would simply wait. The kinetic violence was silenced. Only the low, familiar thrum of the system, always waiting, remained. This story is now part of the archive. Subscribe to help preserve future transmissions, and share this episode with someone who still believes in science.